In the sleepy coastal town of Port Harbor, Maine, a 92-year-old man was about to remind a ruthless motorcycle gang why you should never judge a book by its cover. To everyone at the local marina, James Harbor Jim Sullivan was just another elderly fisherman who spent his mornings watching the boats come in. What the infamous road reapers didn't know when they decided to target him was that this quiet old man was once the Navy's most legendary SEAL team commander, with over 150 classified missions that helped shape the course of modern warfare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salt-tinged morning air carried the familiar scents of fish and diesel fuel as Jim made his way down the weathered planks of Peterson's marina. His steps were measured but purposeful, decades of military discipline evident in his straight-backed gait despite his advanced age. The sunrise painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the gentle waters of the harbor where fishing boats bobbed peacefully at their moorings. "Morning, Harbor Jim," called out Sarah Martinez, the young owner of the marina's coffee shop. She already had his usual ready: black coffee, 2 sugars, served in his favorite chipped mug that bore the Navy SEAL emblem. Beautiful morning for boat watching. Jim accepted the coffee with a grateful nod, his weathered hands wrapped around the warm ceramic. To most people in Port Harbor, he was just another local character, one of the many retired fishermen who made the marina their second home. Few knew the truth about his past, about the missions that had earned him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, or about the team of elite warriors who still considered him their commanding officer, even after all these years. The peaceful morning routine was about to be shattered. The distant rumble of motorcycles echoed off the water, growing louder with each passing moment. The road reapers had been moving up the coast, taking over small towns one by one, extorting local businesses and spreading fear wherever they went. Now they had set their sights on Port Harbor. Before we continue with what happened next, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy real stories about extraordinary people, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got an amazing story coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss. The motorcycles grew closer, their thunder drowning out the gentle lapping of waves against the dock. Jim sipped his coffee calmly, watching their approach in the reflection of the harbor waters. 12 bikes, then 15, then 20 roared into the marina's parking area, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun. The road reapers had arrived, led by their notorious president, a towering man known only as the Captain, a mockery of military rank that made Jim's jaw tighten slightly. Sarah's hand trembled as she wiped down the counter, her eyes darting nervously between Jim and the approaching bikers. The gang's reputation preceded them. 3 towns up the coast had already fallen under their control, their businesses paying protection money, their streets no longer safe after dark. "Maybe you should head home, Jim," Sarah whispered, concern evident in her voice. "These guys, they're dangerous." Jim set his coffee cup down carefully, the same way he had set down his weapon after countless covert operations. "The most dangerous people I've ever met, Sarah, didn't need to make a show of it." His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of someone who had faced true danger and lived to tell about it. The road reapers spread out across the marina, their boots heavy on the wooden planks. Fishermen quickly found reasons to be elsewhere, ducking into their boats or hurrying toward their trucks. The captain, his leather vest adorned with patches that spoke of violence and intimidation, approached the coffee shop with the confidence of someone used to people backing down. What happened next would become legend in Port Harbor, a story that would be told and retold in every bar and coffee shop along the coast. But first, Harbor Jim would need to make a phone call, one that would remind everyone that true strength isn't always visible at first glance, and that some old warriors never really retire, they just wait for the right moment to show what they're made of. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change Port Harbor forever, and teach the road reapers a lesson about respecting their elders they'd never forget. The morning sun climbed higher over Port Harbor as the captain loomed over Jim's seated figure, casting a long shadow across the marina's weathered planks. Behind him, the road reapers created an intimidating backdrop of leather, chrome, and barely contained menace. But James Sullivan had seen far worse shadows in his time, in the pitch-black waters off North Korea, in the steaming jungles of Southeast Asia, in places that still remained classified decades later. "Nice little setup you got here," the captain's voice carried across the marina, drawing nervous glances from the few remaining patrons. Shame if anything happened to it. His eyes fixed on Sarah's coffee shop, where the young owner stood frozen behind her counter. Jim took another sip of his coffee, his movements unhurried. To the casual observer, he might have appeared oblivious to the danger, but old habits died hard, and his mind was already cataloging details with military precision. 23 gang members, most armed with concealed weapons, 5 covering the exits, 2 by the fuel pumps, a tactical deployment that suggested their leader had some military background, though clearly nothing special operations level. "You know who we are, old-timer?" One of the younger gang members stepped forward, a man with a scorpion tattooed on his neck who went by Stinger. His attempt at intimidation might have worked on ordinary civilians, but Jim had stared down elite enemy commandos with steadier nerves. "Road Reapers," Jim replied evenly, setting down his coffee cup. "Been making trouble up and down the coast, though trouble's a relative term, depending on what you've seen." The slight emphasis on the last word carried weight that made the captain's eyes narrow slightly. Sarah watched the exchange with growing tension, her hand hovering near the phone. The local police were already overwhelmed by the gang's presence in neighboring towns. Everyone knew they were understaffed and outgunned. Besides, even if they came, response time to the marina was 15 minutes at best. The captain pulled up a chair, straddling it backward in what he clearly thought was a power move. "Then you know how this works. We're expanding our territory, and Port Harbor just made the list. We'll be collecting weekly donations for our Community Improvement Fund." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Starting with this charming little coffee shop." Jim's gaze shifted to Sarah, seeing the fear in her eyes. She'd sunk her life savings into this place after her father passed away last year. The marina's coffee shop had been a local institution for 3 generations. Now this gang thought they could just walk in and take what they wanted, just like they had in Millbrook and Seavale up the coast. "Young man," Jim's voice carried the same tone he'd used to command SEAL teams through countless high-stakes operations. "I'm going to give you some free advice. You're making a serious mistake." The Road Reapers erupted in mocking laughter, but the captain held up his hand, silencing them. Something in Jim's voice had caught his attention. "Is that right? And why's that, old-timer? You got some friends we should know about?" Jim stood slowly, his movements displaying the kind of fluid grace that came from decades of combat training. Most people his age struggled to rise from a chair. Jim moved like someone half his age. "Let's just say I've spent time with a different kind of brotherhood. One that actually understands what words like honor and loyalty mean." The captain's face darkened. "You threatening us, old man? Because that would be a very unhealthy choice." His hand slipped inside his vest, a gesture meant to suggest a concealed weapon. "I don't make threats," Jim replied calmly. "Never have. But I do make promises. And I promise you, son, if you and your people don't leave this marina right now, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about judging books by their covers." For a moment, tension crackled through the salt-laden air. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves against the dock and the distant cry of seagulls. Then the captain stood, his chair scraping against the wooden planks. "Maybe we need to give the old-timer a demonstration of how serious we are." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jim's hand moved to his pocket, but instead of showing fear, he merely pulled out an old flip phone. "Before you do anything you'll regret, there's someone you might want to talk to." His fingers hovered over the keypad. "Ever hear of SEAL Team 3? The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Several of the Road Reapers shifted uncomfortably. The reputation of Navy SEALs was legendary, even in outlaw circles. The captain's expression flickered between anger and uncertainty. "What's that got to do with anything?" "Everything," Jim replied simply, beginning to dial. You see, back in '68, there was this mission off the coast of North Vietnam. Classified even today, a team of young SEALs surrounded, outnumbered, their extraction compromised. Everyone said they were lost. Everyone except their commander, who went in alone to get them out. The phone began to ring, its sound carrying clearly in the tense silence. "That commander?" Jim continued, his eyes locked with the captain's. "You're looking at him. And those young SEALs? Well, they never forgot. These days they run the largest private security firm on the East Coast, and they still answer when their old CO calls." The phone connected with a crisp click. "Travis?" "It's Jim Sullivan." The older man's voice carried across the suddenly quiet marina. "Remember that conversation we had about Port Harbor? Looks like we're going to need that favor sooner rather than later." The captain's face contorted with rage, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. His hand shot out, knocking the phone from Jim's grasp. The device clattered across the wooden planks, but the damage was already done. On the other end of the line, a gruff voice could be heard barking orders. "Big mistake," Jim said quietly, not even flinching from the captain's display of aggression. "You just assaulted a retired Navy commander in front of witnesses. More importantly, you just gave my people probable cause." Sarah watched from behind her counter, her heart pounding as the captain loomed over Jim. The gang leader's face was a mask of barely contained fury. "You think I'm scared of some retired frogmen? We've dealt with law enforcement before, military too. Nobody touches the road reapers." Jim's slight smile carried decades of combat experience. "Son, you've dealt with regular military. You've never dealt with SEALs, especially not ones who owe their lives to their former commander." He glanced at his watch. "I'd say we have about 10 minutes before this gets interesting." The captain grabbed Jim's shirt collar, pulling him close. "We don't have to wait that long, old man. Maybe it's time to show Port Harbor what happens to people who don't respect the road reapers." Behind him, his gang members spread out, forming a threatening circle around Jim and the coffee shop. But before the captain could make good on his threat, a new sound cut through the morning air. Helicopters approaching fast from the south. Not tourist choppers or Coast Guard patrols, but the distinctive thrum of military-grade Blackhawks. "Right on time," Jim remarked calmly, even as the captain's grip tightened on his collar. "Travis always was punctual. One of the reasons I chose him for point man on those night operations." The helicopters appeared over the marina, their sleek forms casting moving shadows across the water. They bore no military markings, but their professional handling was obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. The road reapers' confidence began to waver as two of the aircraft broke formation, taking up positions at either end of the marina. "Last chance," Jim offered, gently removing the captain's hand from his collar with a precise grip that spoke of years of close combat training. "You can leave now, while you still have operational vehicles, or you can stay and explain yourselves to some very motivated former special operators who don't take kindly to people threatening their old commander." Stinger, the gang member with the scorpion tattoo, took a nervous step back. "Boss, maybe we should—" "Shut up!" the captain roared, his composure cracking. He reached into his vest, but before he could withdraw whatever weapon he was carrying, Jim moved. Despite his age, his actions were fluid, practiced, lethal. In one smooth motion, he seized the captain's wrist, twisted it at precisely the right angle, and applied pressure to a nerve cluster that sent the gang leader to his knees, gasping in pain. "That's a compliance hold they teach in SEAL training," Jim explained conversationally, maintaining the pressure with practiced ease. "Though I learned this particular variation from a Korean hand-to-hand expert during a joint operation in '72. Amazing how well these techniques work, even after all these years." The sound of boots hitting the deck announced the arrival of the first security team, rappelling from the hovering helicopters with military precision. They moved like professionals, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Each man carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of special operations veterans. "Commander Sullivan," the team leader called out as he approached, his tone respectful despite the tactical situation. Travis sends his regards. Said something about repaying a debt from the Mekong Delta? Jim released the captain, who stumbled back, rubbing his wrist and staring at the old man with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The road reapers found themselves surrounded by men who moved with the deadly grace of apex predators. These weren't local police or weekend warriors. These were hardened combat veterans who had seen the worst the world had to offer and come back stronger. "Your call, son." Jim addressed the captain, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "You can leave. Port Harbor now. Never return, and we'll call it a learning experience. Or you can try your luck against men who've spent their lives perfecting the art of combat. What's it gonna be?" Sarah watched from her coffee shop, hardly daring to breathe as the captain looked between his surrounded gang members, the professional operators covering every exit, and the old man who had just thoroughly shattered his illusion of power. The moment stretched like a wire about to snap, pregnant with the possibility of violence. The road reapers were about to learn that true power didn't come from intimidation or numbers. It came from the bonds forged in combat, the loyalty earned through sacrifice, and the quiet strength of men who had faced real battles and lived to tell about it. The next few moments would determine not just the fate of Port Harbor, but the future of everyone involved in this confrontation. The captain's response came not with words, but with a sudden burst of desperate violence. He lunged for Jim, pulling a concealed knife from his vest. But before anyone could react, Jim sidestepped with the fluid grace of a lifetime warrior, using the captain's own momentum to send him sprawling across the dock. "I was hoping you'd choose the hard way," Jim said quietly, standing over the fallen gang leader. "Sometimes lessons need to be physical to stick." The security team moved with practiced efficiency, securing the captain before he could recover. Around the marina, more operators rappelled from the hovering Blackhawks, their movements synchronized and precise. The road reapers found themselves cornered by men who had perfected the art of combat in the world's most dangerous places. "Commander Sullivan," a powerful voice called out. All eyes turned to see a tall, distinguished man in his 70s approaching from one of the landed helicopters. Travis "Iron Hand" Morrison, former SEAL Team 3-Point Man, now CEO of Morrison Security Solutions, walked with the same deadly grace as his men. "Been a while, Travis," Jim greeted him with a slight smile. "Thanks for the quick response. When the man who pulled me out of that rice paddy in 68 calls, I come running," Travis replied, his eyes hard as he surveyed the road reapers. "Besides, my boys needed the exercise." The captain, now restrained but still defiant, spat on the deck. "You think this changes anything? We've got chapters up and down the coast. You can't watch this old man forever." Travis's laugh was cold as Arctic water. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" He turned to address his men. "Show them what a real brotherhood looks like." On cue, the sound of approaching motorcycles filled the air. Not the chaotic rumble of gang bikes, but the disciplined thunder of machines moving in formation. From both ends of the Marina Road, columns of riders appeared. Each bike bore the distinctive emblem of the Poseidon's Warriors Motorcycle Club, an organization composed entirely of former Navy SEALs and special warfare operators. "See, there's something you should understand," Travis continued as dozens of combat-hardened riders pulled into the marina. "Commander Sullivan here isn't just some retired officer. He's the man who founded the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, though you probably know it by another name. Every SEAL for the past 4 decades has trained using programs he developed." Jim watched the proceedings quietly, his presence commanding respect without a word being spoken. Sarah had emerged from her coffee shop, watching in awe as more Poseidon's warriors arrived, their numbers now dwarfing the road reapers. "When you threatened this town," Travis addressed the gang members, "you didn't just pick a fight with an old man. You picked a fight with the entire special operations community. We take care of our own." One of the road reapers, a younger member who had been quietly observing everything, suddenly spoke up. "Wait, Sullivan? As in Ghost of the Mekong Sullivan? The one who led the Sun Tay raid?" The captain's face went pale. The Sun Tay raid was legendary in military circles, a mission so audacious it had changed the face of special operations forever. Jim's involvement had never been officially acknowledged, but in certain circles the stories were still told in whispered tones. "That mission's still classified," Jim remarked mildly, though his eyes twinkled. "But let's just say I've had some experience with complex operations." Travis turned to the captain, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Here's what's going to happen. The Road Reapers are done in Port Harbor, done in every coastal town from here to Florida. If we hear about any of your chapters causing trouble, they'll be dealing with us, and trust me, you don't want that." The security teams began confiscating weapons from the gang members, their movements efficient and professional. Each Road Reaper was photographed and logged into a database, their details recorded for future reference. "But we're not just here to run you off," Travis continued. "We're here to establish a permanent presence. Poseidon's warriors are setting up a chapter house in Port Harbor. From now on, this town's under our protection." Jim walked over to Sarah's coffee shop where the young owner stood watching everything unfold. "Your father was a good friend," he told her quietly. "He helped me adjust to civilian life when I first moved here. Consider this repayment of an old debt." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "All this time, we never knew. You were just the nice old man who loved watching the boats." "Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight," Jim replied with a gentle smile. "Your coffee shop will be safe now. All of Port Harbor will be." As the morning sun climbed higher, the Road Reapers were escorted from the marina, their motorcycles impounded, their chapter effectively disbanded. The Poseidon's warriors established perimeter security, their presence sending a clear message to anyone who might think of causing trouble in the future. The captain, as he was led away, looked back at Jim with a mixture of fear and respect. "Why didn't you just tell us who you were from the beginning?" Jim's response carried the wisdom of his years. "Because real strength isn't about intimidation. It's about knowing when to use power and when to show mercy. Remember that. It might help you become a better man." The aftermath of the marina confrontation rippled through Port Harbor like waves from a stone dropped in still water. By noon, the Poseidon's warriors had established a command center in the old cannery building overlooking the harbor, their presence both reassuring and imposing. Jim sat in his usual spot outside Sarah's coffee shop, watching as Travis coordinated with his men. "Intel coming in from up the coast," Travis reported, joining Jim with a fresh cup of coffee. "The Road Reapers are pulling back from Millbrook and Seavale. Word spreading fast about what happened here." Jim nodded slowly, his experienced eyes scanning the harbor. "They won't stay gone long. Gang like that, they've got too much pride. They'll regroup, try to save face." Sarah brought over a plate of fresh-baked scones, a family recipe that had made her coffee shop famous among locals. "But with you and your men here, they won't dare come back, right?" Travis and Jim exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen too many conflicts, understood too well how violence could escalate. "It's not that simple," Jim explained. "The Road Reapers have connections. Gun runners, drug suppliers, corrupt officials. They won't take this lying down." As if to confirm his words, a police cruiser pulled into the marina parking lot. Chief Michael Henderson stepped out, his face tight with concern. The chief was a Desert Storm veteran himself, and he'd always respected Jim, though he'd never known the full extent of the older man's background. "Jim," Henderson called out, approaching their table. "We need to talk. Just got word from the state police. The Road Reapers have friends in high places. They're claiming your security team assaulted them without provocation, destroyed private property." Travis stood, his posture rigid with military bearing. "We've got everything documented, multiple witnesses, video footage from our choppers. They pulled weapons first." "Doesn't matter," Henderson sighed, taking off his cap. "Their lawyers are already filing injunctions. They're trying to force the Poseidon's warriors out of Port Harbor on legal grounds." Jim sipped his coffee, seemingly unperturbed by the news. "Expected as much. Gang like that doesn't just rely on muscle. They've got legitimate businesses too, political connections." Around them, the marina had come alive with activity. Word had spread about the morning's events and locals were gathering, watching the Poseidon's warriors patrol with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. These were different from the rough bikers they were used to seeing. These men moved with military precision, their discipline evident in every action. "There's more," Henderson added, lowering his voice. State police intercepted some chatter. The Road Reapers have called in favors from other chapters. They're mobilizing. Bikes spotted heading this way from as far as Georgia. Travis pulled out his phone, already sending alerts to his teams. Let them come. We've got enough operators in the area to… No, Jim cut him off, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded elite warriors. If we turn Port Harbor into a war zone, we're no better than them. We need to be smarter. Sarah, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. What about the other towns? Millbrook, Seavale? They've been under the Road Reapers' control for months. If we could show them it's possible to stand up. Jim's eyes lit up with the same tactical insight that had made him a legend in special operations. Not bad, Sarah, not bad at all. He turned to Travis. How many former operators do we have in the region? Not just SEALs. Army Special Forces, Marine Recon, anyone who's still in fighting shape? Travis did some quick calculations on his phone. Between active contractors and Poseidon's Warriors members, could marshal about 200 within 24 hours. Why? Because we're not just going to defend Port Harbor, Jim replied, a strategy already forming in his mind. We're going to liberate the entire coast. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. He turned to Chief Henderson. Mike, I need everything you've got on the Road Reapers operation, their businesses, their fronts, their political connections, everything. Henderson nodded. I'll make some calls. Got friends in the FBI who've been building a case but could never get enough evidence to move on them. Sarah, Jim continued, your coffee shop's always been the town's information hub. People talk here. I need you to listen. Any whisper about Road Reapers activity, any mention of their supporters. Travis watched his former commander with growing admiration. Even after all these years, Jim Sullivan could still take control of a situation, turn defense into offense with the same tactical brilliance that had made him a special operations legend. They think we're just defending one town, Jim explained, his voice carrying the weight of decades of combat experience. But we're going to show them what happens when you push too far, when you make the mistake of waking up old warriors who still remember how to fight. The afternoon sun glinted off the harbor waters as plans were set in motion. The Road Reapers had started this thinking they were dealing with one old man in a small coastal town. Instead, they had ignited a response that would reshape the entire eastern seaboard. The real battle was just beginning, and Jim Sullivan was about to remind everyone why he had been called the Ghost of the Mekong. Night fell over Port Harbor like a heavy blanket, broken only by the strategic placement of floodlights around the marina and key positions throughout the town. The Road Reapers' response came not with the thunder of motorcycles, but with the quiet precision of modern warfare. The first sign of trouble was when the town's power grid suddenly went dark. They've got professional help, Travis observed from the command center established in the old cannery. This isn't regular gang tactics. Jim stood at the window, watching the darkness spread across Port Harbor. His trained eye caught movement on the rooftops, figures moving with military precision. Private military contractors, he confirmed. Probably ex-special forces themselves, but the kind that went mercenary for the highest bidder. Sarah burst into the command center, out of breath. They're hitting the fishing boats. 3 vessels just reported armed men forcing their way aboard. Through his night vision equipment, Travis tracked multiple teams moving through the harbor. They're not just thugs anymore. These are coordinated strikes, multiple objectives. Someone's backing them with serious resources. Jim's face remained calm, though his mind was racing through combat scenarios with the same tactical brilliance that had made him legendary. The Road Reapers have friends in the private security world, companies that operate in the gray areas, staffed by operators who care more about money than honor. Reports began flooding in from across town. The pharmacy was being raided. The bank's security systems had been professionally disabled, and armed men were setting up sniper positions in the church bell tower. This wasn't just gang retaliation. It was a military-style takeover of Port Harbor. Blackwater wannabes, Travis growled, recognizing the tactics. Probably Atlas Security Group. They've been the muscle behind several criminal organizations lately. Chief Henderson arrived with more troubling news. State police have been ordered to stand down. Someone high up is blocking any official intervention. We're on our own. Jim moved to the tactical map spread across the command center table. They think they're dealing with a bunch of retired operators past their prime. Time to show them what real special operations veterans can do. He turned to Travis. Remember Hugh City? When we were outnumbered, outgunned, but we had something they didn't? A slow smile spread across Travis's face. Knowledge of the terrain and the support of the locals. Jim nodded. Port Harbor's people have been here for generations. They know every alley, every hidden dock, every underground storage cellar from the Prohibition days. And unlike these mercenaries, we're not fighting for money. Sarah stepped forward, determination replacing her earlier fear. The fishing community will help. These waters are like a maze if you don't know them. My father used to say there were channels only locals could navigate. Through the windows, they could see more mercenary teams moving into position. Their black tactical gear and modern weapons presented a stark contrast to Port Harbor's weathered fishing town aesthetic. But they had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated the resources available to a former Naval Special Warfare commander. Travis, get me a secure line to Naval Station Norfolk, Jim commanded. I'm calling in a marker from my old protege, the current Spec War Group commander. You're not thinking of bringing in active duty personnel? Henderson asked, concerned about the legal implications. Jim's smile carried decades of tactical experience. No, but there's nothing illegal about a training exercise being conducted in coastal waters, especially if there happens to be a submarine running silent about 3 miles offshore, monitoring unusual surface activity. Suddenly, the radio crackled with urgent reports. The mercenaries had begun moving on the cannery, their approach covered by professional sniper teams. At the same time, a convoy of unmarked vehicles was spotted entering town from the north, reinforcements for the private military contractors. They're trying to box us in, Travis observed, watching the tactical display. Cut off our ability to maneuver, isolate us from potential support. Classic insurgency suppression tactics, Jim agreed. Unfortunately for them, they're using techniques I helped develop. He turned to address the assembled group, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had led men through countless dangerous missions. They think they're dealing with a simple problem: how to take control of a small coastal town. What they don't realize is that they've stumbled into a complex solution. Every fisherman in this harbor is about to become our eyes and ears. Every old storage cellar will become our supply cache. Every local who knows these waters will become our force multiplier. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages. The community is responding. Fishermen are reporting mercenary positions. Shop owners are offering their buildings as safe houses. Even the high school swimming coach, turns out he was a Force Recon Marine, is organizing the local veterans. Jim nodded approvingly. Port Harbor's strength isn't in its tactical positions or defensive capabilities. It's in its people. Now let's show these mercenaries what happens when they threaten a community protected by warriors who remember what they're really fighting for. The night was about to become very interesting indeed, as the sleepy fishing town transformed into a battlefield where modern mercenaries would learn an ancient lesson. True strength lies not in weapons or tactics, but in the unbreakable bonds between warriors who fight for something more than money. In the command center, illuminated only by emergency lighting and tactical displays, Jim Sullivan orchestrated a response that would remind everyone why he had been considered one of Special Operations' greatest strategists. The mercenaries had brought modern warfare to Port Harbor, but they were about to learn some old-school lessons in asymmetrical combat. First rule of coastal operations, Jim addressed the assembled group, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won experience. Control the waterways, control the battlefield. He pointed to the harbor map where local fishermen had marked the locations of mercenary patrols. Travis nodded in understanding. They've got the roads covered, but they don't know these waters, not like the locals do. Exactly, Jim confirmed. Sarah, how many fishing boats do we have that can move quietly without running lights? Sarah consulted her phone, where messages from the fishing community continued to pour in. At least 15 capable captains ready to help, all with deep local knowledge. plus another dozen smaller craft. Chief Henderson, who had been coordinating with trusted officers, added his insight. The mercenaries are running a standard grid pattern through town, professional, but predictable. They're not familiar with the old smuggling routes from Prohibition days. Jim's eyes lit up with tactical recognition. Those tunnels still accessible? Most of them, Sarah confirmed. My father used to show me the entrances. They run all through the old part of town, connect most of the waterfront buildings. The Historical Society maintains maps. The veteran commander moved to the tactical display, his mind already formulating a complex strategy. Travis, how many of your operators have underwater demolition training? About 30%. You thinking what I think you're thinking, Commander? Jim's smile carried echoes of past victories. The mercenaries expect us to either fight head-on or try to slip away inland. They're not prepared for an amphibious response. We're going to show them why Navy SEALs are called frogmen. He began marking points on the harbor map, each position chosen with the precision of decades of special operations experience. We'll split our forces into 3 elements: surface teams using fishing boats as mobile platforms, subsurface infiltration units moving through the harbor, and local support teams utilizing the tunnel network. Sarah watched in amazement as the plan took shape. The quiet old man who'd spent years watching boats from her coffee shop was transforming before her eyes into the legendary commander who had changed the face of special operations. But we need more than just tactical positioning, Jim continued. We need to understand their command structure, their communications, their real objective. He turned to Chief Henderson. Mike, what have your FBI contacts told you about Atlas Security Group? The police chief pulled out his phone, reading from recent messages. They're a private military corporation, officially registered in Dubai. Suspected ties to several criminal organizations, but they maintain a legitimate facade. Their CEO is a former Delta Force operator named Marcus Cross. Jim's expression shifted slightly at the name. Marcus Cross. I know him. Worked with him in the Balkans back in '99. Good operator, but he always put profit over principles. Travis looked up from his own intelligence briefing. Cross is personally commanding this operation. Multiple sources confirm he arrived an hour ago, set up his command post in the Harbor Grand Hotel. Of course he did, Jim nodded. Marcus always did like his creature comforts, even in a combat zone. That's their weak point. They're trying to run a military operation while maintaining their corporate image. The veteran commander began laying out his strategy in detail. We're not just fighting mercenaries, we're fighting a corporation. They have shareholders, investors, a public reputation to maintain. Every move they make has to be justified on a balance sheet. Sarah, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. The hotel's security cameras. My cousin Alice works in their IT department. She could give us access to their feeds. Perfect, Jim approved. We need eyes everywhere. Travis, get your best surveillance teams coordinating with local resources. I want every mercenary position mapped, every patrol route documented. As if to emphasize the urgency of their planning, distant gunfire echoed across the harbor, the mercenaries establishing their dominance through show of force. But Jim remained unperturbed, his calm demeanor steadying everyone around him. They're trying to intimidate the town, he explained. Standard psychological warfare. But they don't understand Port Harbor. This isn't just a tactical objective to these people. It's their home. The command center had become a hub of focused activity. Poseidon's Warriors operators coordinated with local fishermen, mapping patrol routes and planning insertion points. Former Special Forces veterans from around town arrived, offering their skills and knowledge. Even retired Coast Guard personnel joined the effort, their expertise in local waters proving invaluable. Remember, Jim addressed the growing force, we're not just fighting to protect Port Harbor. We're fighting to show that communities can stand up to intimidation, that profit-driven force can't overcome principled resistance. Travis, watching his former commander in action, was reminded why Jim Sullivan had become a legend in special operations. It wasn't just his tactical brilliance or combat skills, it was his ability to turn diverse groups into unified fighting forces, to find strength in unexpected places. The night was far from over, but as the plans took shape, one thing became clear. Atlas Security Group and their mercenaries had made a serious mistake. They had brought modern corporate warfare to a town protected by old-school warriors who remembered what it meant to fight for something more than money. Port Harbor's night sky was illuminated by the mercenaries' tactical floodlights, creating stark shadows across the water. But beneath that artificial glare, in the dark spaces between lights, Jim Sullivan's counteroffensive was taking shape with the precision of a well-oiled machine. "First team's in position," Travis reported quietly, watching multiple feeds from improvised surveillance systems. Local teenagers, supervised by former intelligence operators, had set up a network of cameras using everything from smartphones to fishing boat equipment. Jim stood at the command center window, his weathered face reflected in the glass. "Time to remind Marcus Cross why you never underestimate old warriors." He keyed his radio, voice calm and steady. "All teams, Operation Harbor Light is go. Execute as planned." The response began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Throughout the harbor, fishing boat engines started up, their familiar sounds masking the movement of special operations teams beneath the water's surface. Former Navy SEALs, equipped with modern diving gear provided by Travis's security company, slipped beneath the dark waters. Sarah monitored communications from local supporters. "The Mackenzie brothers have the mercenaries distracted at the North Pier. They're pretending to argue about fishing rights, drawing their attention just like you planned." "Good," Jim nodded. "Phase 1 is misdirection. Let them think we're just local troublemakers." He turned to Chief Henderson. "How's our tunnel network looking?" The police chief checked his tablet, showing thermal imaging of the underground passages. "Teams moving perfectly through the old Prohibition routes. The mercenaries have no idea the tunnels even exist." Across town, Atlas Security Group's forces maintained their professional facade, unaware they were being surrounded from above and below. Marcus Cross, watching from his command post in the Harbor Grand Hotel, was about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between corporate warfare and real combat experience. "Target 1 is in position," Travis reported, referring to their first objective, the mercenaries' communications center. "Waiting for your mark, Commander?" Jim checked his watch, the same worn timepiece he'd carried through countless covert operations. "Execute." Suddenly, the mercenaries' tactical radio network erupted with interference. Their encrypted communications, supposedly secure, became a jumble of static and crosstalk. Jim had brought in former NSA cryptographers, retired specialists who remembered when electronic warfare was more art than science. "Their night vision equipment should be failing right about now," Jim commented mildly. On cue, the mercenaries' advanced optical systems began malfunctioning. The specialized batteries, supplied by Atlas's corporate partners, were proving surprisingly unreliable, especially after local electrical workers had subjected the power grid to carefully calculated surges. "They're switching to backup systems," Travis observed. "Just like you said they would." Jim's slight smile carried decades of tactical wisdom. Corporate operators always trust their technology. That's why they never see the old-school tactics coming. Throughout Port Harbor, the mercenaries' apparent control began to unravel in subtle ways. Boat engines died at crucial moments. Security cameras showed looping footage. Even their satellite phones struggled to maintain connections. "Phase 2, Jim ordered. "Let's show them what real sea dogs can do." The fishing fleet sprang into action. Boats that had seemed to be drifting aimlessly suddenly moved with purpose, their patterns creating chaos in the mercenaries' carefully planned harbor blockade. Behind them, underwater teams attached specialized devices to the hulls of Atlas Security's patrol boats, devices that would make their sophisticated electronic systems unreliable at best. From his hotel command post, Marcus Cross was beginning to realize something was wrong. His forces, supposedly in control of the situation, were reporting equipment failures and unexplained interference. The local resistance wasn't behaving like typical civilians. These were coordinated military-style tactics. "They're starting to understand," Travis reported, watching the mercenaries' reactions through surveillance feeds. "Cross is ordering his teams to regroup, tighten their perimeter." "Too late," Jim replied calmly. "The tide's already turned, literally and figuratively." He glanced at the harbor chart, where the incoming tide was marked. Time for Phase 3. Show them why you never fight sailors. In their own waters. On his signal, the hidden strength of Port Harbor revealed itself. Local veterans emerged from the tunnel network, their positions carefully chosen to split the mercenaries' forces. Former special operators, who had been masquerading as simple fishermen, shed their civilian disguises. Even the local Coast Guard auxiliary, composed largely of retired service members, joined the operation. Multiple targets of opportunity, Travis announced, his voice tight with professional satisfaction. Cross's forces are separated, their communications compromised, their night vision failing. They're fighting blind while we see everything. Jim watched as his carefully orchestrated plan unfolded. The mercenaries, for all their modern equipment and corporate backing, were learning a timeless military lesson. No amount of technology can overcome superior strategy and local knowledge. Send word to our friends 3 miles out, he instructed, referring to the submarine standing silent watch offshore. Tell them it's time for the fireworks display. Suddenly, the night sky lit up with emergency flares, launched from positions that made them appear to come from naval vessels just beyond the harbor. The psychological impact was immediate. Atlas Security's forces, already struggling with equipment failures and coordinated resistance, now had to consider the possibility of official military intervention. Check, Jim said quietly, watching the chaos unfold through multiple camera feeds. Your move, Marcus. The battle for Port Harbor was entering its final phase, and the corporate mercenaries were about to learn why some legends of special operations had earned their status through decades of combat experience, rather than corporate contracts. Marcus Cross stood at the window of his hotel command post, watching his carefully planned operation unravel. Through the chaos of malfunctioning equipment and coordinated resistance, a cold realization dawned. He knew exactly who was behind this. Sullivan, he muttered, reaching for his secure phone. Should have known when I heard about the old SEAL commander. But before he could dial, the hotel's power went dark, backup generators failing to engage. In the sudden silence, he heard familiar footsteps behind him. Hello, Marcus, Jim's voice came from the shadows. Been a long time since the Balkans. Cross turned slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. How did you get in? Jim finished, stepping into the dim light from the window. You forgot the first rule of urban warfare. Know your territory. This hotel was built in 1922. Same prohibition tunnels that supplied illegal whiskey run right under your command post. Outside, the sounds of combat echoed across the harbor. Atlas Security's forces, their tactical advantage stripped away, found themselves engaged with an enemy they couldn't see clearly. Former special operators merged with local fishermen struck from unexpected angles, then vanished into the maze of boats and piers. Your men are professional, Jim acknowledged, but they're fighting for a paycheck. My people are fighting for their home. Cross's face hardened. This isn't about your precious town, Sullivan. The Road Reapers operation is worth millions. Legal businesses, shipping routes, political connections. We've got too much invested to walk away. That's always been your problem, Marcus, Jim replied, his voice carrying the weight of disappointment. You never understood the difference between price and value. Through the window, they watched as another Atlas security team lost contact with their command structure. The mercenaries' night vision equipment, their thermal imaging, their secure communications, all the technological advantages they relied on had been systematically neutralized. You're using old-school tactics, Cross realized. Vietnam-era electronic warfare, counterintelligence techniques they don't even teach anymore. Sometimes the old ways work best, Jim agreed. Especially when your opponent depends too much on modern technology. A sudden explosion lit up the harbor, one of Atlas's patrol boats going dark as underwater demolition teams disabled its propulsion systems. The blast was controlled, precise, designed to disable rather than destroy. Last chance, Marcus, Jim offered. Order your men to stand down. The Road Reapers are finished on this coast. Don't go down with them. Cross's response was a blur of motion, years of Delta Force training evident as he drew his weapon. But Jim, despite his age, moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never stopped being a warrior. Before Cross could level his pistol, he found himself disarmed, his arm locked in a joint manipulation that brought him to his knees. "Still telegraphing your moves," Jim commented mildly. "You always did favor speed over technique." Through his radio, Cross heard the mounting reports of failure. His teams were being systematically isolated and neutralized. Local police, coordinating with Poseidon's warriors, had secured critical positions throughout town. Even the Road Reapers' reinforcements had been intercepted and turned back by state police, finally freed to act by evidence of Atlas Security's illegal operations. "You've lost, Marcus," Jim stated quietly. "The only question is how many of your men have to get hurt before you accept it." Sarah's voice came through Jim's radio. "Commander, we've got Atlas teams surrendering at the marina. Travis says their communications are completely compromised. They're getting orders in their own command frequencies telling them to stand down." Jim smiled slightly. Amazing what a few retired NSA specialists can do when they're properly motivated. Cross slumped in defeat, knowing his operation was finished. The corporate directors would disavow any knowledge of Atlas Security's involvement with the Road Reapers. His career in private military contracting was over. "What happens now?" he asked, professional pride giving way to resignation. "Now?" Jim released the joint lock, stepping back. "Now you get to make a choice. The FBI has been recording everything since your arrival, part of our agreement for keeping them officially uninvolved. You can either face federal charges for conspiracy and racketeering or you can give them everything you have on the Road Reapers operation. Names, dates, financial records, help shut down their entire East Coast network." Through the window, they could see the harbor returning to normal. Atlas security teams were surrendering their weapons to Poseidon's warriors operators. Local fishing boats were returning to their moorings, their crews proud of their role in defending their town. "You planned this whole thing," Cross realized. "From the moment they threatened you at the marina, the Road Reapers, my involvement, all of it." Jim's expression remained neutral. "Let's just say I've had experience turning apparent tactical disadvantages into strategic victories." The sun was beginning to rise over Port Harbor, its first rays touching the water where just hours before a battle had been fought. Not with overwhelming force, but with strategy, local knowledge, and the unbreakable bonds between warriors who remembered what they were really fighting for. "Time to make your choice, Marcus," Jim said, watching dawn break over the town he'd helped defend. "Remember what we used to fight for before you started measuring victory in profit margins?" Dawn broke over Port Harbor with a brilliance that seemed to wash away the night's shadows. The Harbor Grand Hotel lobby had become an impromptu processing center, where FBI agents, finally free to act openly, were taking statements from surrendered Atlas security personnel. Marcus Cross sat in a corner, his corporate armor stripped away, methodically detailing everything he knew about the Road Reapers operation. "He's giving them everything," Travis reported to Jim, who stood watching the sunrise from his familiar spot outside Sarah's coffee shop. "Financial records, political connections, the whole network. Turns out Atlas Security was just one piece of a much bigger operation." Jim nodded, unsurprised. Marcus always kept detailed records. Insurance, he called it. Now it's his ticket to a reduced sentence. Sarah emerged from her shop with fresh coffee for everyone, her face showing both exhaustion and pride. The marina was coming back to life, fishing boats heading out for the morning catch as if nothing unusual had happened. But subtle changes were evident. Poseidon's Warriors members helping repair damaged equipment, local veterans standing watch with quiet vigilance. "Hard to believe it was just yesterday morning when the Road Reapers tried to shake us down," she remarked, pouring Jim's usual brew. "Feels like a lifetime ago." Chief Henderson arrived with updates from his state police contacts. Road Reapers are in full retreat up and down the coast. Word spreading about what happened here. Their whole operations unraveling. Businesses cutting ties, political allies distancing themselves. "Amazing what happens when people stand together," Jim observed mildly, though his eyes carried a hint of satisfaction. "Fear only works when you face it alone." Throughout the morning, More stories emerged from the night's events. The Mackenzie brothers, local fishermen who'd helped coordinate the harbor defense, told how they'd used their knowledge of tide patterns to trap Atlas security boats in shallow waters. Former special operators shared quiet laughs about using old Vietnam-era tactics to confuse modern electronic warfare systems. "Commander," Travis called out, approaching with a satellite phone. "Got some folks who want to talk to you. Remember those young SEALs you trained back in '95? They're running Naval Special Warfare Command now." Jim took the phone, listening for a moment. His slight smile spoke volumes. "Yes, sir. Appreciate the support." "No, sir. Won't be necessary. Port Harbor can handle things from here." "Yes, sir, I remember that training exercise. Good to know the submarine surveillance package came in handy." As he handed back the phone, Travis grinned. "Still got friends in high places, Commander." "Not friends," Jim corrected. "Family. That's something Marcus and his corporate warriors never understood. The brotherhood doesn't end when you leave the service." Sarah watched as more locals gathered at the marina, bringing food for the Poseidon's Warriors members who'd helped defend their town. The initial fear and tension had been replaced by something stronger, a sense of community renewed, of shared victory. "What happens now?" she asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Jim surveyed the scene thoughtfully. "Now the real work begins." The Road Reapers and Atlas security were symptoms of a bigger problem. People thinking they can buy and sell everything, including safety and dignity. "But we showed them different," Chief Henderson added. "Showed them some things aren't for sale." Travis nodded toward the harbor entrance, where several Poseidon's Warriors bikes were pulling in. Already had requests from other coastal towns asking for help setting up local defense chapters. People are tired of being afraid. "Then we'll help them," Jim decided. Not with corporate mercenaries or gang intimidation, but with training, organization, the kind of strength that comes from standing together. The morning continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of a working harbor. Fishing boats brought in their catches, shops opened their doors, and life began returning to normal. But it was a new normal, one where fear had been replaced by quiet confidence. FBI agents finished their preliminary interviews, leading Marcus Cross away in handcuffs. He paused as he passed Jim. "You knew, didn't you? Knew I'd bring in Atlas security, knew how we'd react to resistance. You planned for all of it." Jim's response was measured. "In special operations, we learned to turn enemy strength into weakness. Your corporate backing, your modern equipment, your professional pride, all of it became part of your defeat." As Cross was led away, Sarah turned to Jim. "You really knew they'd bring in professional mercenaries? That seems like an awful big risk." The old commander's eyes twinkled. "The bigger risk would have been letting bullies think they could prey on good people. Sometimes you have to make a stand, even if you're not sure how it'll end." Around them, Port Harbor hummed with renewed energy. The Road Reapers' attempt to take over through fear had accomplished something unexpected. It had awakened the warrior spirit that lived in every community, waiting for the right moment to show itself. 1 year later, Port Harbor had transformed into something few could have predicted. The morning sun sparkled off the harbor waters as Jim Sullivan, now 93, sat in his usual spot outside Sarah's coffee shop. The marina buzzed with its normal activity, but subtle changes were evident to those who knew where to look. "Morning, Commander," called out a passing fisherman, his boat's hull bearing a small Poseidon's Warriors emblem alongside its registration number. The unofficial harbor patrol had become a model for coastal communities up and down the eastern seaboard. "Your usual, Jim?" Sarah emerged from her shop, which had expanded to include a small museum corner dedicated to the night that changed everything. Tourists often stopped to see the photographs and newspaper clippings, amazed that this peaceful fishing town had once stood up to corporate mercenaries and won. "The documentary crew is coming back," she mentioned, setting down his coffee. "They're doing a follow-up piece on how the coastal defense program has spread." Jim nodded, watching a group of veterans conducting training exercises with local youth near the pier. What had started as a response to the Road Reapers had evolved into something larger, a movement that combined community service with the best traditions of military discipline and honor. Travis arrived on his motorcycle, now wearing both his Poseidon's Warriors patches and a new designation, Coastal Communities Protection Network Director. "Just got back from Millbrook," he reported, taking a seat. "Their chapter's up and running, third one this month." "How many towns total now?" Jim asked, though he already knew the answer. 37 active chapters, 15 more in development. But it's not just about security anymore. These communities are helping each other rebuild, sharing resources, standing together against any threat, natural or human. The Road Reapers had become a cautionary tale, their organization dismantled by federal authorities, using evidence provided by Marcus Cross. Their attempted takeover of Port Harbor had exposed a network of corruption that reached into state governments and corporate boardrooms. "Heard from Marcus lately?" Jim asked, referring to their former adversary. Travis nodded. "His testimony helped break up 3 more criminal enterprises. Federal marshals say he's actually doing some good in witness protection, teaching at-risk youth, believe it or not." Sarah brought over fresh pastries as more regular customers arrived. The coffee shop had become a natural gathering place for the community, where fishermen shared space with veterans, and local teenagers learned history from those who had lived it. "Remember that first morning?" she asked, watching boats move through the harbor, "when the Road Reapers thought they could just walk in and take over?" Jim's slight smile carried the wisdom of his years. "They made the same mistake a lot of people make, thinking that strength comes from fear. Real strength comes from standing together, from building something worth protecting." A group of motorcycles rumbled past, former Road Reapers who had chosen a different path. After the gang's collapse, several younger members had sought redemption, joining the Community Protection Program under veteran mentorship. They had traded their old colors for new purpose, learning that brotherhood meant more than intimidation. Chief Henderson, approaching retirement himself, joined them with news. "State legislature just passed the Coastal Communities Protection Act, makes our network official, provides funding for training and equipment. They're calling it the Port Harbor model." Jim watched as a Coast Guard vessel passed the harbor entrance, exchanging greetings with local fishing boats. The cooperation between official agencies and community organizations had become a template for modern coastal security. "You created something special here, Commander," Travis observed, "something that's going to outlast all of us." But Jim shook his head. "I just reminded people of something they already knew, that real security doesn't come from weapons or technology or corporate power. It comes from community, from people watching out for each other." Sarah's coffee shop had become more than just a business. Its walls now displayed photographs of local veterans alongside maritime maps and harbor history. Young people gathered there to hear stories from old warriors, learning lessons about courage and commitment that no textbook could teach. "Got something to show you," Travis said, producing a letter. "Department of Defense is interested in adapting our training program for national use. They want to create a civilian-military cooperation model based on what we've built here." Jim read the letter thoughtfully. "Make sure they understand the most important part. This isn't about creating private security or military contractors. It's about helping communities find their own strength." As the morning wore on, more visitors arrived. Veterans, locals, even a few former adversaries who had found new purpose in community service. Port Harbor had become a symbol of resilience, proof that small towns could stand up to big threats without losing their soul. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah observed, watching the harbor life unfold. "People aren't afraid anymore, not just here, but in all the towns up and down the coast. They know they're not alone." Jim nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. The quiet old man who had once watched boats from a coffee shop had helped spark a movement, reminding everyone that true strength wasn't about domination or fear. It was about people standing together, protecting what mattered most. As the sun climbed higher over Port Harbor, its light touched a community transformed, not just by one night of resistance, but by the lasting power of unity, purpose, and the warrior spirit that lived in every person who chose to stand up for something bigger than themselves. The legacy of Port Harbor would continue, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating enemies, but from building something stronger than fear itself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.